2020. This is the Arlington County Board of Equalization hearing. We've got a very long agenda today, so we're going to try to move through these at a pretty quick pace. The first case on the agenda is Economic Unit 1704902A is an Apple. It's 2025 Fairfax Drive. It's the property known as Wakefield Manor Apartments, the site plan 417. There was some confusion on the vote on Wednesday when it was heard, September 2nd. So having voted on the prevailing side, I'm going to motion to reconsider the vote for this case.
Madam Chairman, this is Barnes, and I was also on the prevailing side. I second your motion.
Okay, thank you. All in favor of rehearing just the vote, would say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. Okay, I'll remind members that this motion is just for voting purposes only. It is not to amend or to substitute another motion. The motion was made by Mr. Penaranda and seconded by Mr. Matskin on RPC 17017-005 to reduce the per unit price from $86,000 to $77,400 per unit, and there was 104 units. That will be reducing the assessment from $8,944,000 to $8,049,600. We've got a motion and a second on the table. This is just for voting purposes. All in favor will say aye.
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 Opposed? Aye.
Nay.
And aye. Okay, the vote now is 5-2 with the opposition of Ms. Dooley and Ms. Hogan. The assessment for RPC 17017-005 has been reduced to $8,049,600. And Rosa, if you can, Mr. Kinney is on the line, so he's aware of it. So thank you. Okay, next on the agenda is the second case, RPC 17014-001, the property located at 1412 North Taft Street. And Mr. Grant Steinhauser is here representing the appellant. Mr. Steinhauser, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about the property.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I trust everyone can see me and hear me this morning. Great. So I'll make this brief since I know the board has a long agenda today. The subject property is the Telus Apartments. I think it was built back in 2014 or a little maybe 2013. But it's assessed at $475,000 per unit, and our asking value $102,157,000 or $402,000 per unit. We appreciate the assessor's work at the first level on this, with a revised value of $450,000 per unit, or about $114 million. We would still point out that this is a 6.1% increase over the previous year, and I think that the assessment's a little too high if you look at the NOIs of the previous years. My appeal materials start on page 42 of 92, but I don't think I need to walk you through page by page for this one. Can really just look at the test page on page 4, and the appeal really comes down to two specific issues. The retail rent that the assessor is using is too high. If you look at the second column F, he's using $515,000. The retail rent has never been this high at this property. If you look at columns A, B, C, and E, it's been between $350,000 and $430,000. I'm not sure if potentially the assessor is double counting the pass-throughs by including it within that figure, but the pass-throughs are actually included in the other / pass-through miscellaneous income of $125,000 there. So that might be what's happening there. Secondly, the assessor's apartment rent is still slightly high, nothing major, but at least by about $50,000 to $75,000. I would point out that the assessor's combined NOI is $5,985,682. That's higher than all 4 of the previous years. The 3-year average is $5,724,000. The 4-year average is $5,680,000. In fact, in my own pro forma, I used $5,835,000, which is higher than those averages I pointed out. So I might even be a little high. in my estimate. But we definitely think that the assessor's NOI estimate is too high. We've pointed out in previous cases that we think cap rate is a serious issue in the county this year. So we're not conceding that issue, but I'm just choosing not to beat a dead horse by continuing to talk about it here. Lastly, and this really is, it's kind of surprising that the assessor is taking the stance not to deduct personal property. If you go to page 50 of 92, you'll see the 2019 personal property statement here. And they have $382,000 of assessed personal property by the county. It's assessed at $382,000. It's mostly furniture. There's lobby furniture. There's a game room here. I think there's pool furniture. So it can't, we're trying to find the total value of the property here via direct cap approach, but the assessment is for the real estate only. So it can't be both personal property and real estate. We have to deduct the personal property in order to get to the real estate only value. Other than those things, that's really it. We feel the assessor's income is high, the cap rate is high, and we think that personal property should be deducted below the line. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Bailey for the county?
Good morning, everybody. So for this property, I want to again thank Mr. Steinhauser for being able to get the owners to provide us with the I&E history. During the department hearing, we discussed how we haven't received any I&E history from this property owner since the very beginning of when they were constructed. So thanks to Mr. Steinhauser for getting that information for us. Based off the information that they did provide to us, we were able to create our summary sheet showing the operating history for 2016 all the way to 2019. And so just to, I guess, touch on the points that he referred to, page 4, it does show on our column F, commercial column, that we use $515,000 and some change for retail rental income. If you go to page 11 of the packet, you'll see this is the commercial rental analysis that we do for properties such as these. And you'll see that we have these spaces that are leased at the top. There are 3 spaces that are leased. One space is 3,650 square feet. Another space is 1,925 square feet. The third space is 6,002 square feet. This came from the information provided by the owner. You can also see that there's a vacant space of 1,912 square feet. So looking at the rents that they're achieving on these 3 spaces that are occupied, we were able to develop the average per square foot rent rate. So when you take a gross look at the retail space that's available, we took the average retail rent rate and applied that to the total commercial square footage. And that's how we came up with our rental assumptions on the text column that's on page 4. You look at the information on page 4, you can see that we made about a $300,000 adjustment to the net operating income after we received the previous 3 years operating history. We were able to project the expenses better once we had this information, because you can see that the expenses increased from the original assessment to the test assessment. We also received information on the I&E about the actual rent rates. So we made adjustments to the rental rates. If you look at page 5, we're actually pretty close. Well, we're actually right in line with what the agent used itself on his pro forma. I think the difference would be maybe $15 on the efficiencies. He's at 1950, we're at 1985. But if you look at The one bedrooms were pretty spot on where he is. One bedroom plus were a little bit higher than where he is. I think two bedrooms were actually a little bit higher on that too, but that's also based off of what was reported on the I&E. I&E actually provided a rent range of all of their units, and that is what we looked at when we tested the apartment revenue. And this information can be seen on page 55 of the packet. You'll see they have their studios. There were 46 studios, 134 one-bedroom units, 15 one-bedroom plus dens, 44 two-bedrooms, 15 two-bedrooms plus dens. And they provide the square footage, and they also provide the rent range of what they're asking for these units. This is a building that's located directly behind the Arlington County Courthouse. As the agent stated, it was built around 2013-14. It was completed, I think, in 2015. Again, we took a look at the information that was provided in 2019, but also the operating history that was provided for 16, 17, and 18 to help us get a better picture of how this building is performing. Based off of the changes that we made, we offered a reduction from $120,537,100 to $113,992,400, and that is the value that we're asking the board to set the assessment at for this year. That is all for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Questions from board members? Mr. Lawson.
This is for the county. How come you don't deduct, this has come up before, how come you don't deduct personal property on a project of this nature?
So again, we've deducted personal property. Well, first of all, the taxes that they pay on that personal property is deducted as an expense. So that's something that we have constantly stated. Another thing is when we have deducted personal property taxes, it's because a unit is being offered to renters as a furnished unit. So therefore, that personal property is adding to the value through the income stream. A statement I made last week, and it may have came off the wrong way, but in the Arlington market, high-rise properties near Metro, every new building we see has a business center, has a leasing office, has a gym, and oftentimes the gym equipment is it can be leased. So we're trying to determine what personal property is actually adding value from an income standpoint to that building. In this market, it's expected that you have certain amenities. And so we're saying, if anything, your vacancy hinges on what amenities you have when you're comparing it to the competition. But as far as like what your lobby furniture looks like, that's not adding to your rental income from a standpoint of what you get to charge from one bedroom, two bedroom.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to explain the best way I can. But we're just looking at it, and what we've said is if you have furnished units available to renters, then that furniture is adding to that rental income. And in that situation, we deduct personal property.
Okay, Mr. Matzkin.
I have a question for the department. It was mentioned that there are 4 retail spaces in the building, 3 are leased and have been leased for a while, and 1 isn't. And I'm by that building all the time. That one's never been leased, ever. So it's at least 5 years on the market without being leased. At what point do you write it off below the line or write it off entirely or somehow not include it fully in the gross potential income?
Well, again,
if you ever do.
This is the first time we received any income expense statement for this building. So this is the first year we've actually seen how that commercial space is actually operating. I think the same as with any other case, we'll continue to look at it and see what adjustments need to be made. But that CAM that was referenced is not being included in that gross potential for the revenue for that commercial space. If you look at our rent analysis, you'll see that if you include the vacant space with the occupied space at that average rate, that's where the 515 comes from. The 515 does not include the pass-through.
No, I understand that. I meant the
Okay.
base rate. It's never created any base rate. If this were year 1 or 2, I'd say, sure. I mean, it's available and you ought to include it. It's potential. But now it's 5. Does it take 10 years or do you not include that ever? The space is the space. It has potential income and it gets taxed, period. There's no wrong answer. I just want to understand.
Yeah. Now, we'll continue to look at it as we always do. I mean, this is, like I said, I appreciate the agent for getting us the information. This is the first year we've seen any information on the subject. So what you're stating about the 5 years never being leased, that's not something that we actually saw, and because we didn't
So it's
have
up to the
information.
appellant to make the case if they wish next time.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's a good answer.
Okay, Mr. Hoffman.
This is, I guess, related to what Ken was saying, but is the 6-year 6% vacancy factor on retail, is that what the Arlington retail market vacancy is right now, or on January 1st?
Based off the INE information we have, yes.
Okay.
You mean the 3%?
It's 3%.
3%.
Six. I see 6% on retail,
6
commercial.
is for the apartment.
3 on the apartments. Okay.
So is 3% market, Irving?
Based off the INEs we have, 3% is the market for general commercial.
Okay, other questions from board members? No? All right, Mr. Bailey, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Okay. When you look at the information that was provided by the appellant, looking at page 10, you look at the rent roll analysis. Page 11, the rent roll analysis. I mean, even the occupied spaces annual rent was $40,000 higher than what the appellant is using for his projected gross potential retail rent revenue. We made adjustments based off the information that we received on the INEs. That included lowering the apartment revenue, increasing the operating expenses, having a better look at the retail rent revenue since we had the rent roll, and we offered a reduction that we asked the board to set the 2020 assessment at, which is $113,992,400. That is all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Steinhauser, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yeah, thanks. The issue really is the retail rent, as pointed out. The assessor's $515,000 is significantly higher than any of the 4 actual years, which range from $350 to $436. We feel the apartment rent is still slightly high. The NOI is higher than any of the last single 4 years and about $250,000 plus higher than the 3 and 4 year averages. The cap rate is an issue, and the personal property is an issue, and we would contend it doesn't matter if it adds value or not to the property, even though it does here. It can't be both personal property and real estate. You can't tax it as both real estate and personal property. You have to deduct the personal property to get to the real estate only value. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Okay, it's just among board members. What's everybody think? Mr. Hoffman?
I guess, I'd be interested in the legal opinion from Barnes on the whole personal property thing. It does seem like double taxation. If they're getting a tax bill for fitness equipment, and then that's being factored into the value of the property.
Yeah, I'll kind of share my thoughts on this because I thought about it quite a bit since the last time. My feeling is if you were to sell this project, you would sell it furnished. A hotel, you might not. Or a hotel, you might sell it, deduct the value because the new buyer is going to change all the furniture. But here, you have lobby furniture, you have gym, stuff in the gym, And I think that wouldn't be replaced unless it ended its useful life. So I don't have a big problem with the way the county's doing this. And that's just my opinion.
I mean,
Yeah,
should it
Mr.
be,
Matz-
should it,
Go ahead, Mr.
all
Hoffman.
right, I'm just following up on that. Should it be considered real property instead of personal property then?
Well, we're looking at it from the income production, not, I mean, obviously it's personal property and not real estate because it's not affixed to the building. But when you're looking at it from an income viewpoint, I mean, you can't have a lobby with nothing in it. It's kind of the way I look at it. So I think it's, you know, like a hotel room. If you don't have a bed, you can't lease it. So I don't know. I see the difference. I'm not, you know, maybe that's something we ought to look at the end of the year.
Okay.
But for today, I'm okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Matzkin.
I'll just add quickly that, of course, the taxes paid on personal property become, excuse me, become an expense that are taken off. So it's not complete double taxation. It is a deductible item, but I'd love to see what other taxing jurisdictions do about that. It seems to make sense the way it was presented to us, but I'd love to know if there's a consensus among the public appraisal community on that. And I had one other thing. No, I'll let it go. I think it was already covered. Thank you. That's all I have.
Yeah, and just, I mean, on that same topic, years ago, I don't know what year it changed. Years ago, it was deducted below the line. And then the county made a decision to not deduct it with the thought that the taxes paid were expensed. So again, if this is something that they're going to revisit, they'd have to revisit for all of the properties across the county. Mr. Lawson.
I guess the next question is, does anyone believe there should be a partial reduction based on the retail? And I'd be interested in what others think about that.
Okay, Mr. Matzkin.
That was my item that I erroneously thought had been addressed. I thought 5 years of just walking in and seeing a cold, dark shell for a retail space is enough time for it to not be so much a potential income earner. But the county didn't know that. The appellant hadn't been keeping the county up to date that it's a wasting asset. And I'm comfortable keeping it as a potential income earner this year, but the appellant would be advised, not by me, to bring that up next year, if indeed it's not leased. It's funny, it's the corner space closest to Courthouse Road, but it's laid out inefficiently for a tenant, and they ought to make the case next year if they wish, but I'm comfortable this year based on the county's prior lack of prior knowledge.
Okay, Mr. Hoffman, you had a comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, if I proposed to a bank or a lender to finance a retail project right now, and I said, you know, we're going to assume 3% vacancy in this strip mall that I want to build, and the next thing the bank's going to say is, what's the market vacancy? And I don't know. It just seems like from my personal observation that the retail vacancy in this county is a little bit higher than 3%. I was kind of searching through the latest reports and stuff to see if I could pull up the exact number, but it strikes me as incredibly low, what the county's using there.
Okay, Mr. Lawson?
Greg, at some point, I think the property owner ought to go in to amend the requirement that be retail. We had, I think it was 1555 Wilson, or one of those buildings, and we had kind of below the ground retail, and we ended up converting that to another use. I think it was residential. But that's something that I think at some point the property owner ought to take it into their own hands and do something.
Okay, Mr. Matzkin.
Yeah, on that, I've seen that a couple of times. Retail space just wasn't moving as retail, and they absolutely got permission and is now being used as office, first floor office. So thank you, Barnes.
As long as you pay those proffers, you get permission, right? It's not free.
Mr. Penaranda.
Well, talking about this particular case, I think, that maybe the retail vacancy may not be appropriate overall, but I think in this case, looking at all the numbers, I think I'm okay with it. The rental rates that the county is using are totally in line. I don't see where the NOI or the income itself is, out of whack. And I'm okay with all the numbers of the revised numbers. I don't really see where we can make any adjustments. I think the NOIs are totally appropriate.
Okay. Any different opinions of that?
No.
All right. Would somebody like to make a motion then?
I'll go ahead and move that we reduce the assessment to 113,992,400 based on the revised numbers.
I'll second.
Okay. Motion and second by Ms. Hogan. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Mr. Matzkin, I didn't see your vote. Are you aye? Mr. Matzkin, are you there?
I think he froze.
Yeah, he's frozen. Okay, well, at minimum, we are 4 to 1. And we'll have to clarify what his position is, and that was no for Mr. Hoffman. So there is a quorum there. So it is reduced to the county's test column of 113,992,400. And I believe Mr. Matzkin is left. We'll give him a second to sign back on again.
All right, thank you, board. Thank you, Mr. Bailey.
Thank you, Grant.
Thanks, Grant.
Okay, I heard Ms. Borman earlier. Do we have Ken back on yet?
Good morning, Eileen Borman is here.
Okay, thank you. Let's just wait a second for Mr. Matzkin. Rosa, is he in the queue to come in?
No, I don't see him. I'm here waiting.
Mary, we're having internet problems all over the county. I understand because of the school
He's
stuff.
here now.
Okay, he's back. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Matzkin. I couldn't see your vote. Which were you? Yay or nay on the last case? You're on.
Yeah, I got thrown out of the meeting. Yay, I'm in favor of the reduced amount from the test.
Okay, so the vote will go 6 to 1 with Mr. Hoffman disagreeing. Okay, Rosa, you have that for the minutes?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. All right, moving along to the third case on the agenda. It's an economic unit 1702402A, 1800 14th Street North, and we have Miss Eileen Borman representing the appellant. Ms. Borman, you can start with your 8 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, board. Good morning, county. This is a property. It's broken into 2 parts by the assessor. It has some affordable units and some market units. Initially, I'd like to just point out that the assessment was erroneous and is therefore not entitled to the presumption of correctness that is normally entitled to, an assessment is entitled to, because the county initially assessed this property as though there were 395 units, not 370. They have agreed that there are 370 units, but at this point, the taxpayer has overcome any burden of proof it needed to in order to prove that the assessment was erroneous. Moving to the merits of the case and our appeal, looking at what is now page 67 of the case, and actually I guess you can look at the county's spreadsheet. What you'll see is that, and I have to tell you, I am experiencing tremendous internet problems, and so it is taking me a little bit longer to find things and have them come up than they normally are, which is also why I'm not visual. On page 54 of our case, or 54 of the board package, what you'll see is the rent roll for the subject property. And this shows the entire rent roll for the entire property, and it indicates the market rent for the units. On page 55, what you'll see is the potential rent, the weighted average of potential rent for all of the units at the property as of the end of the year. You can see that number is $2,458.84. If you take that and you multiply it times the 370 units times 12, you'll end up at a rental figure that is somewhat less than $10,913,512. That is very close to the number that we have in our stabilized potential column of $10,971,250. So our rental number is based on a potential income based on leases actually in place and or market as of the beginning of the year. The county has looked at it and revised its assessment to reflect 370 units. However, the income that it is using is substantially greater than what can actually be achieved based on the rent roll. We also took a look at the rent matrix that was provided to us at year end, and looking at that rent matrix, we end up at a rental rate, a gross potential rent of $10,900,000. So we believe that the rate that the county used in both its original assessment based on the wrong numbers of units and the revised assessment is significantly greater than that which can be achieved. In our stabilized potential, we used a 5% vacancy rate. I was reviewing the guidelines this morning and realized that we should have used a 6% vacancy rate given the guidelines at the property. And so I would like to make that change at this point, which would reduce the gross effective income potential to $10,262,215. Initially, we used the county's operating expenses at the property of $2,810,000, which works out to $7,600 per unit. We think that is reasonable. However, we do recognize that that is in excess of the county's guideline rate, which is somewhat lower, $6,945 per unit. We capitalize that value. We use 4.5%. There's, again, just like the last appellant, we believe that the county's rate is too low. But in the spirit of not beating the dead horse, we changed that and are using the same rate the county used, weighted average rate of 4.172%, with combining both income streams, which works out to a capitalized value of $144,087,000, and then deducting 1 year's lost rent brings it down to $133,169,900. So again, we looked at the actual rent roll in place to come up with a gross potential income. We used the 6% vacancy rate to come up with this number now, which is the guideline rate for high-rise apartments. And we believe that the expenses are reasonable as put in, but if you put them in at $7,000 per unit, the expenses would be $2,590,000, and then adjusting using the cap rate, the combined cap rate, the value, capitalized value is 148, 347, and deducting 1 year's lost rent brings you to 137, 429, 800. And that is the total number that we are seeking in terms of the assessment. I will reference that I don't understand how Mr. Chicas did the arrived at his 2020 revised value. It appears that that's on the first page. It appears that he added an amount in for the affordable. He valued that at 477,300. His income approach values that at 377,0940. And we would ask that if you look at Mr. Chinkis's revised numbers, that is the number you use. Even though it's tax exempt, it should be corrected. And then for the parcel that is not tax exempt, the value that Mr. Chikas came up with was 137,75. I actually can't read this if it's a 9 or 8, 472. So the total value would be, using his revised numbers, would be 141,534.12. However, we do think that the number that we have at 137,429, 800 more accurately represents what can be achieved at the property, and is in accordance with section 58.1, 3295.1, that talks about looking at that actual income shall be considered. Now, I know we have negative income here because the property was in lease up, but certainly it's not going to be able to earn more than it's generating in relationship to its rent roll. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chicas for the county, please.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning, board members. Good morning, Ms. Borman. And looking at Gables Point 14, essentially what we're talking about here is pure projection, given that the property was open approximately 6 months in 2019's operating year. The county would direct the board to focus upon the 3-year summary sheet in conjunction with the rent roll as indicated by Ms. Borman. I believe that's on page 54 of 84. As noted by Ms. Borman, the county did erroneously value the property as having 395 units on January 1st. Appreciate Ms. Borman in correcting that information for us. She provided us the rent roll, as you can see on page 54. One of the things we noted, and the major difference between our opinion of value and Ms. Borman's will be the use of the rent roll and the use of the average of the rent roll. One thing that we need to note here with this rent roll is it lists all 370 properties, and that includes 39 committed affordable units. Obviously, those committed affordable units brought down the weighted average quite a bit, and so should be isolated as they are constrained by income requirements in the county. And it also obviously weighs down the market valuation as well, the market component. You'll note too that on page 55 of 84, they list 2 models as having 0 value as they were being used as models at the time, but obviously they have gross potential income projections behind them, especially considering one of them is the second largest unit that they offer. We took the time to break down those 331 market units apart from the 39 committed affordable units, correctly placed them in columns F1 and F2 as was applicable for their use, again being either market or committed affordable. We went ahead and applied the guideline vacancy and concession amount for the market at 6%, 3% for committed affordable. In lieu of a 1 year of historical operating performance from the property, we went ahead and used guidelines. In fact, we were well ahead of guidelines in both respects to the per unit expense for the high-rise market side as well as the committed affordable component. We applied the applicable cap rates that would be in use for each property type, and then we took off 1 year of lease up for that initial year. which comes off at the bottom there. That came to a revised value of 141,530,400. And Mr. Bailey can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the last part Ms. Borman noted was a difference in our original assessment and where we inadvertently forgot to include the improvement value for the tax exempt parcel. And that's explained on page 1, I believe, it might be page 2, where the parcel was initially kept off. It's on page 3, excuse me. But that had a value of $2,175,300. And so that should equate for the difference and what you see on the internet page of 143 million and change, 143,757 versus the actual math, which is 141,530,400. Based upon, again, using pure projection for this property, but based upon ours being, we believe, a bit more accurate in the sense of separating the market components from the committed affordable, and then isolating those so as to not mess with the weighted average of the entire project. We believe that columns F1 and F2 are more representative of what's going on at the property as of January 1st, based again upon the rent roll that we received. The board is familiar with how we go with 1 year projections on its initial year, taking off 1 year of gross lease up. In this case, we applied those lease up deductions for each component, market and committed affordable. And that led to a revised value of $141,530,400. Anything to add, Mr. Bailey? Mike?
You're on mute.
Just to clarify, Ms. Borman stated that parcel, which has the improvement value added, as Chris stated, is for the low income. It's not for the low income, it's for the transitional housing building. I think it's that's the building owned by the county. It was part of the site plan. It's the smaller 5-story building that sits on the corner. So that is completely tax exempt. That's why it's valued on cost approach, because it's a transitional housing building owned by the county. The low income units and their value would be on parcel 17024033. That's where all the rental units are valued. And then the 17024034 is the transitional housing value. And again, that value is determined through the cost approach because it's not an income producing property. That's all.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. I just want to ask one question. I apologize, Mr. Chicas, if you went over this while I was taking notes. But where did the original 390 units come from, 395 units from the original assessment?
That I do not know. It may have just been something we had inadvertently written down on a worksheet. A lot of time when the project is transitioning from site plan to income approach, we're going to rely upon the site plan for those years that's valued that way. And it may have just been something we transposed over. I'm not entirely sure if they changed the units that were allowed.
The site plan was approved. The site plan was approved for 409 units. 14 units were transitional housing, so that's where the 395 came from.
I see. Okay, thank you. Other questions from board members? Mr. Matzkin.
One quick one for the appellant. You didn't break out, as the county did, affordable versus market rate units. Is the 2019 INE submission a weighted average of those incomes and cap rates?
Mr. Matzkin, when we looked at the potential income that appears in our stable appellant pro forma column G, that does include a weighted average of ADUs and market rate units.
Okay, so it's weighted. Okay, good.
It is a weighted average.
Thank you.
Okay, other questions? Mr. Lawson.
For the county, is the cap rate for the affordable the same cap rate that would be used on a totally affordable project by a nonprofit?
The cap rate that is used for any of the committed affordable will be the same regardless if it's used 100% or otherwise. So that's why we break out that component so it has its own cap rate.
Thank you.
And if
Okay.
I could just clarify, Mr. Lawson, on our stabilized potential that I went through just now, using a 5.172 cap rate based on the average, based on the total income for the property, that is a weighted average of the cap rate and that Mr. Chicas used for both the affordable and the market rate properties.
Yep, we have that. Okay, thank you. Other questions from board members? No?
Yeah, I
Okay,
have one.
Mr. Penaranda?
This is for Mr. Chicas. If the value that was, the improvement value that Mr. Bailey says it's for transitional housing for parcel ending 034, the 2,175,300. If that was included, the total value, the original assessment would have been a lot higher, wouldn't that? Is that true or no?
No, I think it was still a revision because the original assessment was 143,9347, and if we include the tax exempt parcel, we'd be at 143,705. So it's maybe $219,000 revision regardless.
Okay.
Yeah, just slightly.
Mr. Penaranda, I believe Mr. Bailey stated that the entire portion of both the affordable and other units were on parcel 033. And if I misunderstood that, I apologize. But if that's correct, then I don't know, strike that. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Okay, right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are we done with questions from board members? Okay. Okay, Mr. Chicas, if you would take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yes, ma'am. So again, just ask the board to recognize the county's effort to disassociate the committed affordable units from the market rate to give a more accurate value for each component. That was done in columns F1 and F2. They each have their own deductions, if you will, through the guideline book. They each have their own value, which make up a total value. In this case, the revised value of $141,530,400 we believe should be confirmed and revised. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now, Ms. Barman, you can take your minute to wrap up, please.
Thank you. Looking at the actual weighted average rent roll, the rents that would be generated are what we showed on our stabilized potential column, and the looking at the rent roll and ignoring the weighted average, it would be lower than the 10,917,250. Using a 6% vacancy rate results in a gross effective income of 10,262,215, and using $7,000 per unit results in an NOI of 7,672,215. Using the weighted average of the affordable and market rate units brings your cap rate to 5.172, a value of 148,347,087. Deducting the rent for 1 year results in a value of 10,137,429 compared to the 141,512. I appreciate Mr. Chicas's attention to detail and splitting out the units, but if you use a weighted average in the stabilized potential, there's zero difference in the results. But one does result in an NOI that is overstated, whereas the one provided by the taxpayer results in an NOI that accurately reflects the property's potential. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. It's just among the board members now. What's everybody think? Mr. Matzkin.
That weighted average, 10.5% of all the units are committed affordable. And in the breakout of the department, we have cap rate only, I'm talking about 5.9 versus 5.15. And the appellant, of course, uses 5.5. If you weight down the lower cap rate, 5.15, and weighted by 10% should be at 5.9. You don't get 5.5 that the opponents presented, but rather something closer to 5.25. Bringing up the lower cap rate because 10% or a higher cap rate. So I like the way the department is very clear, and I haven't done the math, but it's certainly doesn't go from 515 to 550 because 10.5% are a higher cap rate rated. So I'm not trusting the cap rate that the appellant has used. And again, I didn't have the time to get the exact number, but it's not anything intuitively close to 5.5.
In addition, I mean, many of us who have been on the board advocated for years to do this, to actually break them out. So just the fact that the county does this now, I mean, this is something that we've asked for years. So I am not in any way looking to go back and weight them and put this more to a subjective measure. I think this is, you know, it breaks it out nicely. You see what portion is attributed to affordable and which is back to market. And I think that that's done properly. So I would disagree with the appellant on that. Mr. Lawson, you had a comment?
Yes, ma'am. The only thing that I would like to, you know, maybe keep in mind and look at towards the end of the year, you know, I still think that a low mod unit in a, you know, otherwise market project, I think the cap rate should be adjusted. And the reason I say that is, you know, I know they got bonus density, but that's taxed on its own. But they don't have the benefit of lower tax rates. I mean, excuse me, lower interest rates and other governmental programs that encourage it. So nothing on this case today, but I do want to look at that towards the end of the year. Thank you.
Okay. I believe you're getting what you want on this one, so I'm confused as to your comment, but Mr. Hoffman?
One thing, I want to make sure I'm on the right page here. There's 3 buildings on this site, and 2 of them are market rate, and 1 is combined committed affordable and transitional housing. Is that correct? Is that what you guys took away from this? I'm just looking at the map of this site, and it looks like there's 3 buildings. 1 of them is owned by the county, I heard, and is not being taxed. But then there's 4.7 million in assessed value for one of the RPCs that I guess is the affordable component that's still owned by the private developer. I just want to make sure I understand it correctly if I'm casting a vote.
I believe so. You know, that issue hasn't come up from either party, so I assume, I mean, I'm only looking at the total number of units, the 331 and the 39. I'm not sure what buildings they're all in, and since that was not an argument brought up from either side, I have to assume that portion it's allocated out properly.
Okay, yeah, I just want to make sure we're not assessing a county-owned building and putting it in an economic unit with a private developer, because that doesn't seem right.
Okay, any other comments? Mr. Lawson?
Yes, ma'am. Last comment. Shouldn't we at least go to the test?
I'm sorry?
Shouldn't we at least go to the 141, 530, 400? I know the county didn't do that because it's not a significant enough number.
Mm-hmm. Right, that's what we're discussing now. Yeah. Other comments, Mr. Yates or Penaranda?
No, I was looking at the county's test.
No, I agree. I think the county's test is the best thing, the best numbers that we can go by right now. I don't really see, you know, we don't have previous years or anything like that, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I agree. All right, any further discussion?
No.
All right, then I'll move to reduce it to the county's revised number from the test at 141, 530, 400.
I'll second.
Okay, a motion and a second by Mr. Yates. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. It's reduced to the county test of 141,530,400. Okay. The next case on the agenda also is an economic unit, 1602602A is an Apple, 1800 North Lynn Street. And that is Central Place Residences. Ms. Borman, representing the appellant, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about the property. Is Ms. Borman on the call?
I am here. I am trying to get my internet back. It has just come back, so I am available, and I apologize for slow internet. Okay, so this is 1800 North Lynn. This is a property that the county has looked at and determined that the assessment should be affirmed. The assessment went up by quite a bit from 19 to 20, from 207 to 224 million. The taxpayer is looking for a value of $214 million, 213 basically, 9. In reviewing the assessment, the county made a number of, in their written comments, a number of notes. One, it indicated that it goes through all the various line items, and as the board as often points out, it's the NOI that really matters. And in going through all the line items, the one that struck me the most is that DREA overstated the achievable NOI at the property by $561,000, or 5%. The county, and that's a significant number. The county went back and reviewed the rent roll and income expense survey form that was provided by the taxpayer. And despite the fact that they overstated the NOI by more than $500,000 in the original assessment, they went back and looked at the 2019 INE and said, we are going to increase the NOI by $1,232,000 over the actual NOI at the property. This is a property that we do have an income stream on. And again, I'm just going to direct the board to 58.1, 3295.1 that states that the actual gross income generated from such property and any resultant loss attributable to vacancies, collection losses, and rent concessions shall be considered, as well as the actual operating expenditures and impact of additional expenses or expenditures. In valuing this property, we believe that the county ignored this provision. And we have looked at the actual 2019 income at this property, which results in a value of, using the county's cap rate, it results in a value of $213,923,700. And basically, the county has overstated the NOI in the initial assessment by over $500,000. And you can break it down any way you choose. But the bottom line is that's what happened. Despite the fact that they used more than $500,000 greater NOI at this property, the county increased it in their test by $1.2 million to a value that is greater than the initial assessment.
OPEB, and I think he has a point.
Yeah, I think we probably should.
We should do a separate line. Everybody else does it, so there's no reason to fold it all together. Accessible.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Ms. Borman?
Yeah, I was hearing background discussions.
Yes, go ahead.
Having separate can I ask, is the board discussing the cases outside of the purview of the appellant?
No.
On a separate line? Because that's what it sounded like.
I don't think that was anyone on the board.
I'm looking at the board members right now and nobody's speaking, so please continue.
That was really weird. Okay, thank you. Basically, it's just that the income is substantially less, that the code provides that actual income shall be considered and that concessions shall be considered. And in looking at that and using the county's cap rate, a value that is significantly lower than the 2020 assessment of 224 is derived, and that number is 213,923,700. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chikas?
Yes, ma'am. So not to confuse the issue too much, but the code cited by Ms. Borman, 58.1-3295.1 specifies that the board shall consider the actuals being received at the property in regards to the residential component only, not the retail component. And that's significant because that's really where the point of conjecture lies between the appellant and the county. With Ms. Borman's cooperation, we received quite a bit of information regarding the 24,524 square feet of retail. We were presented with the idea, the evidence that almost 40% of that retail was taken by a company that had actually never took possession. Excuse me, 40% of that 24,524 square feet. So what we did was we looked at the information, separated the two components, the retail from the residential, and saw that the residential is doing quite well. This is a new property, a highline property, if you will, upper luxury, if you will, or near luxury. It's located on the metro. There in Roslyn, it's across the bridge from Georgetown. So as far as being a prime location, it's done well. Lease up has taken very little time. Basically came online some point in 2017. By 2017 to 2018, it had cut its vacancy by almost some 45%, and then another 4% for operating year 2019, and essentially stable as of January 1st, 2020, with the I&E listing about approximately 6% of vacancy. So we looked at the rent roll in regards to the residential side and noted again that the 2 years in a row of uptick in apartment revenue had no issues projecting forward for another year of rental revenue increase. We saw that there was increases on the parking side, increases on the miscellaneous revenue side, increases on the utility reimbursement side. Gross potential income increased 2 years in a row, almost 3% in 2019. And again, this is almost entirely due to the residential component being the driver for that. The board is familiar with how we do rental projections, especially again, given that this is still in its initial lease up stage, if you will, 3 years into its infancy. We did note upon a retail rent roll analysis that the building was able to capture per square foot rates that were quite aggressive. You'll see those listed on, I believe it's page 4 of our packet. Let me find out for sure. Page 5 of our packet. You'll see the per square foot rental rates that they were getting. Obviously, to keep those a bit constrained as opposed to with the reality of the situation of 40% vacancy, we did squeeze that per square foot rate from what they're achieving in actuality down to a much more modest, I believe we're using $38 per square foot on our test columns and column F2. Obviously, as the board again is aware, even though the facts on the ground are showing 40% vacancy, we need to project what that potential would be if it were 100% occupied. And to do that, of course, we did this math that you'll see on page 4 of the packet, 124 pages, which led to column F2. As Ms. Borman noted, that's still quite a bit of an increase over what actually occurred in calendar year 2019, but that is, again, the difference between a 40% drop off in revenue, potential revenue on the retail side versus 100% potential revenue projection made based off the facts on the ground versus what we're getting with the rent roll. So again, column F1 is representative of the successful residential component. And again, that's reflective of what the rent roll showed us, what we were able to divine, again, incorporating the guideline vacancy and concession, 6%, and then make an adjustment for the low projection on the operating expenses as of January 1st. Again, given that they're still in the infancy of lease up, we did make adjustments for that increase for operating expenses, almost 3.6%, increase over 2019's number. And as Ms. Borman noted, that still came up to a projected net operating income increase over the January 1st assessment. As the board is familiar, we do not recommend an increase without a third-party appraisal. So we did come back to our original assessment and believe that, again, at least based on the low projections made for the residential side and the fact that this was obviously before we had the information regarding the 40% vacancy on the retail side, that our projection of 5%, approximately 5% growth for the entire project is a reasonable projection. That being said, we do believe the county should be confirmed at $224,527,600. Mr. Bailey, anything to add for you?
No, sir.
So that is where we stand. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, questions from board members? No? Okay, Mr. Chicas, do you have anything else you need to tell us?
No, again, just based on the information that we tested, that did indicate a higher value than what we came out January 1st. So we do believe January 1st value of $224,527,600 should be confirmed. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Borman, would you take a minute to wrap up, please?
The retail component is a very small component of this property. The majority of the income is attributable to the multifamily. One of the tenants that is not in occupancy, rent is still being shown in the income stream because they're drawing down on the tenant's letter of credit. As such, we believe that the projected income shown for 2019 is fully reflective of the retail as well as the apartment, and that the value should be reduced to $213,923,700 to reflect what is actually occurring at the property.
Okay, thank you. Now it's just among the board members. Comments? Okay, Mr. Matzkin.
Very quickly, I sure wish the appellant community, the taxpayer community, it protects or enables its appeals to breaking out different components of mixed-use buildings, because incomes are different, vacancies are different, cap rates are different, and they can only assist themselves in their appeals if they can compare their apples to the Department of Real Estate Assessments appeals. I listen carefully to this appellant's, like the last one, their appeals, but I can't weight things back and forth and make an intelligent decision or a more objective decision than we can by just lumping numbers together, whereas the department does break them out and their comments do, to me, add up, and I've got to therefore go with the more compelling evidence.
Yeah, I agree. Additionally, I mean, the appellant's argument in the opening statements that the county overassessed by, $500,000. I mean, that's not really an accurate statement. I mean, they didn't have the 2019 figures when they did that assessment, so it was based on a projection. So, I would disagree there. And I think, to be honest, based on what the property should do, I'm okay with the original assessment. I think it's, the test, I think, was possibly a little aggressive. I don't think I would have gone quite that high, but I certainly think it's worth the assessed value.
I agree with that.
Anyone else? No? All right, then I will move to confirm the county at $224,527,600. I have a second by Mr. Matzkin. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. County's confirmed at $224,527,600.
Thank you, board. Thank you, county.
Thank you, Ms. Borman.
Have a good
Okay.
day. Bye. Bye, Chris.
Ms. Borman, hold on.
And she hung up.
Okay, well, the next case on the agenda is Economic Unit 1602102A is an apple, 1001 Wilson Boulevard. What's the status of that, Mr. Bailey?
We wanted to postpone this one due to some ongoing conversation about the PDSP. We're trying to get some more concrete facts on the case on both sides. So she's working with her client, and we're working with CPHB on the matter. So we were hoping to get the case postponed, and we also feel like it's best to hear the other cases that's the other RPCs that are part of this PDSP all on the same day, as the issues at hand are the same on those cases as well.
And why wasn't, how come this hasn't been able to be done prior to?
Well, we've been working on this a lot, actually, and it's just one final matter of disagreement, and it's kind of a the owner says this, the county says this situation. So we're just trying to get concrete facts on this one parcel, which is a by right parcel. It's a by right parcel that was purchased from the Commonwealth of VDOT. There's disagreements about whether or not that parcel has density. And so we're trying to get the experts who worked on the PDSP to give us information on what is the actual case.
Mr. Lawson.
They may need to get a determination from zoning.
And that was one thing that I don't want to speak for her, but that was part of the conversation, was she was going to get determination from zoning. And so that's another reason for wanting to delay it, because we don't know. For one, I don't know if that process has been started, and then how long that process will take. And we just believe it's in the best interest of everybody for her to have the opportunity to reach out to zoning and have zoning provide us with that determination letter.
Okay, Rosa, do we have a slot on another day to be able to move this to?
What date were you thinking of? I would have to look at the agenda of the,
No, I don't care if it goes to the end of October at this point, but I'm just asking, is there a slot
Yes.
available?
Yes, there will be, yes.
Okay.
I think Eileen's back, so.
Okay, so that being said, where's the board on this? Are you okay with accepting the request for postponement?
Yes.
I'm okay with it. I think if they both sides are working on it and there's still unresolved issues, I think, yeah, I'm okay with it.
I would suggest you get it done timely, because we don't intend to go over the deadline. That's the reason for the double meetings. Okay, do we need a motion to do that?
I think so.
You do? All right, then I will motion to accept the postponement.
I'll second that.
Okay, second by Mr. Penaranda. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Should we say to a date to be determined in the future?
I don't think we need to be that particular. I said before the end of the session. I think that's fine. So it's 7-0. The postponement is accepted. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, board.
Okay.
Sorry, I dropped off early.
Okay. At this time, before we start with Mr. Warren, we'll take a 5-minute break. It's 10:15, so we'll be back here about 10:20 and pick up the final cases. Okay, do we have, I'm looking for Ms. Hogan. Yep, I see Ms. Hogan is back. Mr. Yates, are you back? Okay, I see Mr. Warren and Mr. Chitlick.
Yes. Are you
Okay,
seeing me?
thank you. Do we have Greg Rains on the call?
Yes, ma'am, I'm on.
Okay, perfect.
Mary, are you seeing me?
Yes.
All right, my camera had gone out. I just rebooted everything. All right,
No,
thank you.
you're on. I can see you and hear you. Okay, moving along on the agenda. The next two cases, RPC 200100026 and 200130009, were previously heard on Wednesday, September 2nd. Due to technical difficulties, Mr. Rains from Ditmar was unable to testify, and there was remaining time on the appellant side. So I'm going to allow in individual cases. In the first case, Mr. Rains to have 3 minutes to speak to the property. The county will have 3 minutes to respond to that. We'll have questions, wrap up, and we will revote these two cases. Okay?
Thank you,
So
Mary.
the first,
Yeah, go ahead, sorry. Which properties first?
the first case is RPC 200100026. That's located at 535 North Pollard Street. So Mr. Rains, you're going to start now with your 3 minutes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. In the hearing last week, and one from Columbia Park earlier, it does seem that the board has come to, maybe the county in general, just the garden style versus mid-rise argument. On a minor point, I think the county referenced some of our advertising collateral as a defense of why, it's a mid-rise versus a garden style. We listed Columbia Park as a garden style, and that wasn't part of the defense of why it was a mid-rise. So our marketing, and I could show you pictures of units that would blow you away, and then you get the unit. We have to market the property to the best of our ability. So the mid-rise on our marketing is just our marketing team. That's not me putting the cap rate classification on any marketing, but that's a minor point. I just kind of wanted to say that, 4 stories versus 9 stories when it comes to an Arlington multifamily project is massively different. There's different amenities, larger amenities. And when we use these cap rates for garden style apartments, which this is, we're putting it into a trophy building classification as far as unit value. And that's just not achievable. And so over the past 3 years, we've argued this garden style argument just as the only mechanism to get these cap rates to a point where we're still not happy with the cap rate. We don't feel the property or the unit value is there. But that's the mechanism that we use, because they are garden style units for all intents and purposes. But now we're saying, okay, these are mid-rise buildings. And so for Columbia Park, Thomas Court, and this particular property, Birchwood, we're putting the unit values to a place where there's no substantiation in the market. And I just think that the board, as we move forward into next year and beyond, we have to get a way for a garden style unit off metro, near metro, to be moved off of these cap rates that, when they're loaded, they're not achievable. So I just, the difference between, I can't stress enough that we have 9-story buildings on the corridor, and the value in those buildings is substantially different from a mid-rise standpoint than this building. And so that's all I wanted to say last week. I could tell by the Columbia Park case that we were going to land on this being a mid-rise. But, we need to have, we have to formulate a way to get this done properly, or we're going to have to pursue it further, because I just can't, the unit values moving up with these cap rates we can't continue to have the rates, the values of these units grow to a point where the appraisals aren't seen. So that was it. I really do appreciate you guys making time for us to speak. Last week I was trying to say something, but I couldn't get off mute. So and appreciate the work y'all are doing. But that's what I wanted to go over.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chikas?
Yes, ma'am. With respect for Mr. Rains, essentially what you just heard was all subjective. It's all anecdotal. What we presented to the board was all objective. Again, using the owner's own advertising brochure, it's listed as a mid-rise. Freddie Mac lists the property's 4 stories to 9 as a mid-rise. Only, in fact, 1, 2, and 3 is garden. CoStar lists as a 4-story mid-rise, and even again, the appellant's own paperwork lists the property as 4 stories, which we've equated as a mid-rise per our guidebook. We've asked going forward, we believe that that's clear-cut criteria for what a garden is, what a mid-rise is, and what a high-rise is, and the rest is really just opinion, be it anecdotal or otherwise. So we believe that this property and the next one should be confirmed as the mid-rise properties that we have shown that they are. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, any questions from board members on this testimony? No? Okay, Mr. Lawson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I voted, I think, on this case to uphold the county because the precedent had been set. My personal feeling is that this is a garden, but I got outvoted and the board didn't agree with my conclusion. So I think we need to be consistent. So that's why I voted for the county.
Okay, I'm sorry, we're in questions. Do you have a question for either party? You're on mute. Mr. Lawson.
No, I don't have a question.
Okay, thank you, sir. Are there any questions from board members? Okay, Mr. Chikas, do you have anything else you need to tell us on the property?
No, ma'am.
Okay, Mr. Rains or Mr. Warren or Mr. Chitlick, does anybody have any final comments in your minute to wrap up?
Just the precedent had been set in the past as well to call these all gardens. So the precedent now is to call them back to mid-rise, but it's not like this has historically always been a mid-rise property. In the past 2 years, it was actually a garden property, and then this year it's back to a mid-rise. And the question, I guess, to ask is whether it's a garden or mid-rise, when you unload the cap rate with both the tax rate and the 20 basis point replacement reserve, you're at a 5 cap rate, a sub 5 cap rate, which the thought of one of these properties selling at a sub 5 cap rate is a bit ridiculous. And I know Mr. Hoffman in the past has looked at price per units as a comparison, and I'd ask that in your deliberation to compare this on a price per unit to the other properties and say, is this property truly comparable to the price per unit assessments of other properties, and hope that that occurs. And I think if it does, we might have a different outcome. But thank you again for taking the time to reopen these. I know that's not normal, but these aren't normal times, so thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, it's just among the board members. I believe Mr. Lawson has made his comment. Other folks, Mr. Hoffman.
I still view this as a garden style apartment. And I know last week when we reviewed it, we were trying to maintain the consistency, given that the county's now defined a 1 to 3 story, a 4 to 8 story, and a 9+ story category. And it's a pretty bright line that they've created there. But I'm sympathetic to the appellant's argument that this doesn't belong in a category with trophy, highly amenitized buildings on Metro corridor at that cap rate. I think regardless of the number of stories, a cap rate of 5.75 seems fair.
Thank you. Mr. Matzkin.
I'll add on that for a moment and have another point. With mass appraisal, unfortunately, I don't think we can get exact property, 60,000 plus properties in the county. We can't get it down to the fine, 4 stories in Metro, that's one cap rate, and 7 stories not in Metro is another cap rate. It's a little sloppy, but I think that's the essence of mass appraisal. As long as we don't, on the other hand, if they said, well, all apartments are certain cap rate, that would be the other end of the spectrum. So I don't think it's perfect, but I am comfortable with it because that's how it's done in an urban environment. Second, more importantly, we talked a lot about stories, but we didn't talk about parking. And a hallmark of garden apartments tends to be overwhelmingly surface parking, whereas this and mid-rise and certainly high-rise, it's underground parking and protected parking. And this apartment has both of those gated underground apartments. And so to me, that surely takes it out of the garden and into the mid-rise classification.
Okay, Mr. Yates, you had a comment?
Yes, we have to draw a line somewhere. The county's come up with reasonable reasons why they've drawn the line. And I guess the one question I would have to the county or to think about, we have a lot of these come up at 4 stories, or some partly below grade or not, but 4 stories. If the county considered looking in the future into 5 stories, if that might make the difference where the line gets drawn a little more, it's not as gray as all these mid-rise garden apartment unknowns seem to fall. And it's not unknown. It is definitely within their guidelines, and that's my only point. It's a gray area, and maybe 5 is something the county should consider, which is not nearly as gray by any means.
Mhm.
Anyway.
Well, I think anytime that you draw a line between the number of floors, you're going to have an issue. If you go to 5, then it's going to be, well, what happens? I'm 6. I think it just opens a can of worms. I think the industry standard from a standpoint of, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac do say, the split is between 3 and 4. So, I know Mr. Chitlick,
I understand their decision.
No. But I'm just saying, and Mr. Chitlick referenced that, in years past, the norm was that we did accept that, and we did. And this was something that went back and forth. And as Mr. Matskin said, I think from a standpoint of equalization, if we're treating these, there's a difference between garden and there's a difference between mid-rise, that this clearly falls in the mid-rise and should stay in the mid-rise. I'm sympathetic to the appellant because I certainly think there's differences, just like I think there's differences when you go between the maximum level of mid-rise and go to a high-rise. And you get caught in the same argument there. We're only 1 floor off, so from a standpoint of equalization, we've got to pick something. The county's picked it, from an equalization standpoint, I'm fine with the assessment as it was.
I agree at this time.
Yeah. Mr. Penaranda?
Yeah, I mean, we've already touched this point for so many other buildings, and like you said, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, I myself would consider it as a mid-rise if I were to list it as a condominium. And Ken's point of, parking, I think that even makes this case even stronger to consider it as a mid-rise, because I've never seen a garden project with parking underneath. But, I think we're clear on what's a mid-rise. And, you can't really ignore what the appellant or the owner or the rest of the community considers this building as. They advertise it, they promote this as a mid-rise, and that's the marketing technique they use to be able to get the rent. So I don't see how we can make the change now just for assessment purposes.
And it also had an elevator, which is what a lot of gardens don't.
Right. Your mic is off, Mary.
Okay, I'm sorry. Would somebody like to make a motion if there's no further discussion?
I'll move that we confirm, as we did last week, the assessment at $39,480,100.
I've second.
Okay, a motion is second by Mr. Yates. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Mr. Hoffman, are you an aye? Your mic is on.
I'm unopposed.
You're opposed? Okay.
Yeah.
So the vote is changed 6-1 with no Mr. Hoffman, but the county is confirmed at the $39,480,100. Okay, the next case on the agenda is the second case. 2001309 at 470 North Thomas Street. Mr. Raines, you can start with your 3 minutes and tell us what you weren't able to tell us last week, sir.
Thank you, Mary. And I understand. I think Mr. Warren presented some non-anecdotal trophy value buildings last week on this property. So I apologize for me thinking what I'm saying is objective, and maybe it is a little bit of subjectivity to it. But I think it's pretty objective that the value per unit on this property and on the last one was out of line with sales or values in the area. Per unit, it's way off. And so to me, that's objective because I know the comps and I know the sales. The other thing, and as we get down to, really equalizing these units, we've said that it's story based, but in the last case, we talked about surface parking. We talked about the management marketing. And again, we've had a case this year where we marketed as garden style. It has surface parking. It has below grade 4th floor, but it's the floors that's the delineation point. And I do think that one of the board members had a good point about a 5th floor. And I think that's these have to be learning processes because these do not achieve the values that a mid-rise would at 8 stories. It just isn't there. And so again, Blake and Jeremy have values that they can share of other buildings per unit that this building isn't in the realm of, that I think is non-anecdotal or less subjective. But to me, it's very objective that we've used this in the past to get these per unit values and a cap rate that is justifiable. And now we're moving off of that with, you have to have a line, but to me, we're using height of building to define these properties when it's not height of building. And if it was truly that objective and surface parking and non-elevator and garden style marketing mattered, then Columbia Park would be not a mid-rise, but now it is. And so I think we're moving the needle based on floors where that's the only thing we're looking at and it's off. And so we need to look at these per unit values. And like I said, I know Blake last time when this building was presenting properties with associated values. So I don't know if Blake has that, but that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Oh.
Yeah, I was just going to say, the view at Liberty Center, 4000 Wilson Boulevard on the corner is in the same neighborhood as this property, is obviously a high-rise property with a huge number of amenities and is assessed lower per unit than the subject property. And then the Maxwell, which is the same mid-rise, low-rise, about the same floor height, but a much nicer property with more amenities, Washer-Reed building, is assessed at over $100 per unit less than the subject property. So if you could please consider, I know we talk about equalization. One thing I want to stress is the default on mass appraisal is not an excuse for incorrect assessments. And now that we're at this level, we're able to dig in a little bit deeper to the specific property. And when you look at the specific property, you put it next to comps and say, does this make sense? And this greatly fails that test.
Oh, okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Chikas.
Yeah, I think it's just to reiterate that point is that we're starting to get into a fine-tooth comb where it's the appellants and the owners don't want to be judged by the floor height, but by the number of units, but by the number of units per floor height, but that has surface parking, but that has an elevator, but that has near metro access. So if it's applicable and beneficial to the owner, then that's what they would like incorporated into the decision making. The point of mass appraisal is that we look at all of these units comparatively. So when something is from 4 to 8 stories, that's a mid-rise. If it sits within a half mile of the metro, then it gets a metro cap rate. But to get into looking at per unit value, they took the time to talk about the Liberty building, which has hundreds of units compared to the Thomas Court, which has 49 units. Obviously, the per unit value is going to be higher on a building that has hundreds of units as compared to, it would be lower as compared to Thomas Court, which has 49 units. So regardless of the total value being much lower, when you're looking as a per unit value, it's going to be higher because you're looking at something that has, 100, 200 units less. So again, we're back to what makes a mid-rise apartment, and that's really was the point of this talking point today. The guidelines have set out that 4 to 8 stories is a mid-rise. Freddie Mac backs that up. Fannie Mae backs that up. CoStar backs that up. The appellant's own appellant packet backs that up. The owner's marketing brochure backs that up. So the argument may be what is applicable for that cap rate that's within the 2011 tier, if you will, for the mid-rise apartments, but it shouldn't necessarily be amongst whether or not mid-rise is applicable or not, because we've proven that objectively. Mr. Bailey did note, per Mr. Chitlett's talking point, of having a mid-rise that's sold in the 4% cap. 1325 Pierce Street sold in October of 2019 for a reported 4.01% cap rate, $552,000 a unit. And that sounds high, but it also only had 19 units. So again, on a building that has less units, you're going to get a higher per unit valuation. Given the fact that the Thomas Court performed year over year better than 2019 than it did in 2018, metrics across the board, apartment revenue up, parking revenue up, other revenue up, RUBS and utility revenue up, gross potential up 8.3%, effective gross up 8.3%. And again, even considering operating expenses being up 12%, net operating income increased by 6.8%. Given that it's a mid-rise and all the metrics we proved and that we underprojected across the board for gross potential income, effective gross income, operating expenses, and net operating income, we do believe that the property should be confirmed $21,991,600. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, I apologize from before. I'm getting overwhelmed with all these messages from the school. This is for the property owner. At how many floors do you have to abandon stick built?
Barnes, I thought it was 5, but that'd be more on my construction teams.
Used to be 6 is my recollection.
Well, maybe I'm thinking 5 above retail, but I think you're right. It is 6. It is.
Yeah, I think it's 6.
Yeah, it is 6. You're right.
Okay, other questions from board members? Mr. Hoffman?
Yeah, I was hesitant on the last case to recommend maybe coming in next year with an appraisal, but I was wondering from the appellant, if you, Greg, or Jeremy, if you ever gone and tried to get Fannie Mae or HUD type financing, if they ever did an appraisal on any of these properties, and if you had any color on that.
Thanks. We've had appraisals on the property from a trust standpoint, when for the families, but that we will be doing one. I mean, honestly, we'll be doing one now because we just think this is way out of line. But we have had appraisals in the past, and they're not at this number.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to.
But I don't turn. We didn't. To be honest with you, we didn't. We thought that this would kind of be what we did in the past, and we'd be able to get to a garden style classification. So this number will be much more than our appraisals. But we have had them, but we haven't turned them into the county.
Okay. Yeah. We usually don't put too much weight if it's for the purposes of something else. Trust.
Exactly. Yeah. That's why. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. But I was thinking, since we're quoting Fannie Mae and everything with the garden definitions, that if there was ever something that was a HUD or an agency lender with an appraisal, then that might be relevant.
Well, we will definitely be pursuing one now, so we'll have it in the future.
Okay. Other questions? No? Okay. Mr. Chikas, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
No, I mean, as stated, we believe the property is performing well year over year, specifically in regards to 2019's metrics. Everything was an uptick. We believe we've established the property as a mid-rise. The applicable cap rate was utilized, and so we believe that county should be confirmed. Thank you.
I want to also add, because we're not just relying on Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, even though that does support the mid-rise classification. We also looked at the Appraisal Institute 5th edition dictionary real estate appraisal, which stated mid-rise apartment buildings multiple unit dwellings range from 4 to 9 stories tall. This is on page 126 of that book. It's also part of the email dated August 28, 2019 to the board members. So again, that is why we're standing firm on our 4-story being a mid-rise. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Warren, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yeah, if you don't mind, really quick, Chris threw out a sale just now, which is 1325 North Pierce Street, which I'm glad he did because Ditmar is the one that actually sold that. And he's right, it did sell for a big number, but it's a 19-unit apartment building that sold for $8.6 million. So it's a little bit apples and oranges. But I think the big thing here is he mentioned, well, the number of units are different, so you can't do a per unit comparison. But if you have a nicer building with higher rents and a lower cap rate, it should not be assessed at $100,000 less per unit. So you have to test what you're doing. You can't just say, look, I got a guidebook, I applied it, and what it says is what it says, even if what it says doesn't make sense. Because although it's mass appraisal requires testing to make sure that it's accurate. And that's what's being missed here by the county in their analysis. Again, I beg that Mr. Hoffman will look at the comparisons here and say, does $450,000 per unit make sense for this 49-unit apartment building that is a 4-story building? That's what I'd like you to test, because when you compare it to 12-story buildings that are nicer, that are getting much higher rent, they're assessed at a fraction of what we're assessed at, and that does not make any sense.
Okay, thank you. Okay, it's just among the board members again. Mr. Hoffman.
So I did look at the unit per unit price or assessment rather last week when we heard this case, and I ended up making the motion to confirm, and I think it was because drilling into the actual unit mix, it turns out this building is like 92% 2 and 3 bedroom units. So on per unit, I wouldn't want to try to equate it to another building that's a bunch of 1 bedrooms or studios and 1s. So there is a difference there in the ability to generate income on those large units. And then my other point and reason why I was pretty supportive of confirming the county's assessment here is that they're using the non-metro cap rate, which is a little bit higher and I think a little bit closer to reality, at 5.4 instead of 5.15 for the last property we just saw. So I'd still support confirming the county.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Matzkin?
Thank you. I wanted to refine one thing that I said on the last case, which is still certainly relevant to this case, and that's on mass appraisal. What I absolutely did not mean to imply is that 4 stories, that's it, it's mid-rise, there's no discussion. I think the department and ultimately, if it comes here, the board ought to consider unusual cases. If the 4th floor is semi-underground, if the 4th floor, if the main building is assessed on the 2nd floor because of a hill, or there's unusual circumstances concerning ADA compliance. So I don't think the bright line is immutable. But I think all things being equal, there's nothing unusual that mass appraisal is good enough. And finally, I was very sympathetic to the appellant's point of view that a much nicer building, the Liberty in this case, ought to be assessed per unit at more dollars, because it's clearly a superior building in all ways to this particular case. But I'm really appreciative that Mr. Hoffman dug in and found more particulars on what is a unit and what therefore should be its evaluation. So thanks very much.
Okay, other comments? Mr. Penaranda.
Well, the only new point that we heard today is the per unit value. And I think all of these buildings, are reviewed once they are appealed. I think the county does review them, they retest them, and, they may not put it as another column when it doesn't really apply, or they don't think that it would make a difference. But, everything is valued based on the income approach. So I don't think the per unit value is really applicable. If we're going to start doing that, I think we're going to be all over the place. The number of units, the type of units, A lot of buildings have more efficiencies than 1 bedrooms or 2 bedrooms. So I don't think that would, I think it would just take us out of control really on the way the values are assessed. So I'm okay with the current assessment.
Well said.
Okay, Mr. Lawson?
Yeah, I'd be interested in Greg's opinion on this. Greg, is there much difference in your opinion when you go from stick built to, say, concrete, structural concrete?
Yeah, it costs a lot more.
It costs a lot more. There is value in that, Barnes. I mean, we see that, in our build. We build all concrete.
Greg Rains, you're not allowed to talk. That was for Greg Hoffman.
This is just among board members, please.
Oh, sorry. I like concrete. Sorry.
Ditmar is the best at concrete that I know of.
I also like concrete.
Okay. Any further comments?
No.
Okay, would somebody like to make a motion?
I motioned last, so I'll motion again to confirm the county's assessment at $21,991,600.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion and a second by Mr. Penaranda. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. The county is confirmed at the $21,991,600. Okay, to the 8th case on the agenda, RPC 1404508. The property located at 901 North Randolph Street. Mr. Warren, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about the property.
Okay, so this is the Randolph Towers Apartments. It is consistent of one RPC. It's currently assessed at a total value of $200,609,600, $394,000 a unit. The county is recommending no change to the original assessment. However, they are showing a reduction in their test column, but are not advising a change because of the it doesn't fit outside that 3% change or variance. However, with a property that's $200 million, their revised test column of $196,209,700 at the very least, we would wish the board to consider. Our requested value today is $193,176,900. This property was originally built in 1986. It's 509 units, a 21-story high-rise. If you turn to the county's page 3, the mixed-use income and expense summary, you'll see the reported historical financials at the property. And what this really comes down to is the total income that's being projected by the county. In addition, the prior year increase, when you're looking at what was actually reported in 2019, this value increased 13% from the prior year. It was initially assessed at $177,416,600 in 2019 before it increased to the $200 million. But over that same time frame, that same period, the actual NOI only increased 2%. This is a property that over the last several years has been going through a modernization effort of their existing or older units through 2018 and 2019 and into 2017 as well. But you can see that it's reflective in what they've been capable of actually generating historically over the last at least 3 years. And what they've actually reported in terms of EGI, 13.69 million in 2017, 13,997 in 2018, and then this is just for the apartment portion, 13,113,074 for 2019. Combined, it's 14,120,881. So when you combine that, if you combine column D1 and D2, you're seeing just in column D1, just the apartment side for the total EGI. But once that's combined with the retail, the county's estimate of total EGI of $15,089,261 is well in excess of what this property is capable of generating in the last several years as it's gone through its monetization efforts of staying competitive in the market and being able to maintain the rents with their competitors in this marketplace. So that's really the biggest issue here. Again, our value, requested value of 193,176,900, we believe is indicative of what the property is capable of generating as of the valuation date, the 1/1/20 valuation date. The county's test column, although it doesn't fall within that 3% change, you're still talking about a $4 million decrease to the current assessment. That matters just because it doesn't fall within that 3% variance. At the very least, we wish the board to consider the county's test column. Jeremy, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add.
Yeah, just the assessment history here in 17 is 165, and then it went up to 174, and now it's up to 177, and again last year, and now we're at 200 million. So 13% increase. This increased $23 million from the year prior. And Greg or Sophie, do either of you want to add anything? It sounds like a no.
No, Jeremy, I think that was no. I think you guys did a good job reviewing everything.
Yeah. So I mean, the county's using an NOI of 10.9 million, and the actual is 10.7. And I know in the past we've been burned by look at 3-year averages or 4-year averages, and the NOI is 10 million, 9.7, 10.5, 10.7, and they said, okay, let's use 10.9. So they're too high. They have missed the mark on this one on the NOI, which has burned us in the past in some cases, but it looks like it's gonna most likely help us on this one. So I think our pro forma in column G1 and G2, I know we're often told that it's way too aggressive. It's not in this case at all. We would still be, if we accepted this, we'd be still looking at a $16 million increase over the prior year, which is obviously a dramatic increase when the NOI has only gone up by $200,000. So that's the case. Obviously, if you have questions, let us know.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chikas?
Yes, ma'am. So the county would be primarily relying upon the mixed-use income and expense summary, page 3. Looking at the property, the board is familiar with how we look at these properties, isolating each component, if you will. Looking at it, apartment revenues up 3 years in a row, year over year increase. 2019's increase at 2.3%. Retail is also up 3 years in a row, year over year, with the 2019 increase at 6.1%. Parking is also up in 2019 at 2%. And though other income is down, again, we talked about this, it's mostly attributable to a breakup of the utility reimbursement of RUBS, which increased about 3%. 92%. Overall, we saw an increase 3 years in a row for gross potential income, 2019's increase at 1.5%. And even with the management-induced vacancy, which increased from 12.7 to 13.2%, the property saw an increase in effective gross income 2 years in a row, with 2019's increase at just shy of 1%. As would make sense, given the, again, management-induced vacancy at the property in order to modernize their units, we saw a decrease in operating expenditures 2 years in a row. 2019 was down about 3%. When we look at the January 1 assessment projections made by the county as compared to the 2019 information we received, we saw that we did unfortunately underproject gross potential income by about $245,000, just about 1.5%. And due to the large increase in vacancy, we did overproject the effective gross, almost $970,000 or 6.9%. We did, which is unusual for the county, we overprojected the operating expenses, again, based on the previous years, 16, 17, 18. Our number was in line, but there was a drop-off in year 18, and again, another drop-off in year 19. So we overprojected just about $600,000 for operating expenses, and those three metrics led to a overprojection of the net operating income at about $370,000 or 3.4%. Not totally off kilter, again, considering that even with the large fluctuations in management-induced vacancy, The property still increased its net operating income 2 years in a row, with 2019's increase at 2.2%. The board is familiar with our work. We did perform a test on the newly received information, as you can see in columns F1 and F2. Recognizing that there was a stabilization in the property as of January 1, 2020, I believe they're back down to about 6%. We did reflect on what was going on with the property for 2020 and noted that, again, we underprojected the gross potential income by about $840,000, and yet that still led to an overprojection of effective gross by about $400,000. Still keeping in line with the 3-year average of operating expenses, we overprojected by about 8%, and that led to a net operating income projection of about 1.3%. Again, very much in line with what's going on at the property in years 2018 and 2019, which saw increases of 8.6% and 2.2% respectively. As noted by Blake, Mr. Warren, we do not offer these revisions if they're within 3% of the original projections made by the county. It's a reasonable threshold. The county has heard before. Given that we did perform the test, it was within 3%. We do believe that the county should be confirmed at a value of $200,609,600. Mr. Bailey, anything to add?
No, I do not.
Yeah, so again, just reiterating what Blake talked about, the owners put in approximately $7.2 million over the last 2+ years. Management choice to basically not release tenants as they leave, as they turn over, and take advantage of the occupancy and renovate and modernize their units. We could see that's been working in a 9% increase in apartment revenue in 2018 and another 2.3% increase in apartment revenue in 2019. Essentially the adage, they're doing more with less. They're actually making more revenue with less available units, which is essentially the idea behind capital improvements. It's a direct return on investment that we're seeing year over year. Given the metrics that we've talked about, given the reasonable test within 3% of the original 2020 assessment, we believe the county should be confirmed at $200,609,600. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? Mr. Hoffman.
Yeah, I've got two for the county. One was, I guess the last inspection was 2017, and I wasn't clear on when the modernization project was finished, or is it still ongoing and kind of rolling as people move out?
That was for the county, Mr. Hoffman?
Yeah.
So Mr. Warren and Mr. Raines and Ms. Chow might be able to speak better to that. I would note that we noted the occupancy increased from 4.6% 17 to 12.7% 18, and then increased to 13.2 in 19. But I believe I noted that it's back down to 6% as of January 1st. And I'm not sure if I inquired with Mr. Warren. There's one or two of these cases that we inquired, where they were at in the modernization process. But it seemed to me that this was smoothing back out to normal occupancy levels.
Yeah. Okay. Can the appellant speak on that? Are you basically done with all the major rehab work at this point?
No, I mean, we're.
Right, can you answer that?
We have. Yeah, I'm at. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. From the unit modernization standpoint, we're still moving through those. So like Mr. Chica said, if sometimes it's based on, it's more, we're not forcing move outs. So we're slower as far as the amount of units we're doing like per month, but it is still going on. We have about 200 apartments left to do.
Okay.
How many are, oh,
I'm sorry, wait a second. Mr. Hoffman had a second question.
Yeah, the second one for the county was, I just didn't know if there was a mistake here, but on page 5 of the packet, something jumped out. It seemed odd that the 1 bedroom plus den is like 30% higher on the rent table than a 2-bedroom apartment?
Normally, those are pulled directly from the rent roll, so it could just be anomaly in what rents they were able to achieve.
Okay, maybe those are the
We could take a
modernized
look at
units or something.
Yeah, but normally we would also break that down if we didn't on this one, because they tend to be pretty good about explaining if it's a furnished unit, a modernized furnished unit, etc. But that would be my guess, is that it was pulled directly from the.
Okay.
Greg Rains, is that correct? The 1-bedrooms in a den get a little bit more than the 3-bedrooms?
The 2-bedrooms.
In the
Definitely
three
not
also.
in the 3 bedrooms.
The 3-bedrooms on
I mean,
the assessor's applying 3,250 to the 3-bedrooms and 3,300 to the 1-bedroom in a den. I think that's a mistake.
3,300 for a 1-bedroom and a den would be either a typo on our end or a big outlier rental by a leasing agent. We would not get.
Is that the furnished units? Is that the furnished units? Do you have 1-bedroom plus den furnished units? Because on the original worksheet,
The furnished units, Irvin, the furnished units, I'd have to look at the unit specifically. I wouldn't know off the top of it. The furnished units can move to different unit types based on demand. If it was a furnished unit for $3,300, then yes, that would be in line.
Which then you're literally valuing. Then you're valuing the cost to rent the furniture, which is completely different than valuing the real estate. Then you're saying an unfurnished unit is $2,000 and a furnished unit's $3,300. So that $1,300 delta is literally the cost to rent furniture, which is not
the cost.
Real estate in any way. It's like getting it from Rent-A-Center. It's just not
this property has a personal property tax adjustment.
Okay, I believe we're all out of order here. Okay, questions are asked and answered. Mr. Yates, you have a question?
Yes, to the appellant. In most of my questions related to the renovations have been answered, but how long is a unit off market and what kind of renovations are being done? And you have about 200 left to do. So you've done about 300.
Yes, sir. Yeah, we're basically we're not moving walls or anything. It's counters, cabinets, flooring, light fixtures, everything. But it's not, we're not moving walls, changing bathroom unit layouts. We're not doing any of that. It takes, between 2.5 to 3 weeks if fully on it. So the vacancy, by the time the crew gets in there, to the time they're done, to the time it comes back on market, it's probably looking slightly less than a month. And then, we have to rent it. So, but, from a work standpoint, about a month.
And 200 left is as of today, not as of the first of the year. Right?
Okay.
Yeah, so that's a good clarification, Jeremy. Yes, that's as of today. That would have
So
been.
you may have been about half done previously. But the first year. Okay.
Okay, other questions from board members? No. Mr. Chikas, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yes, ma'am. Again, we talked about the success of the property, increases in apartment revenue 3 years in a row, increases in retail revenue 3 years in a row, parking's up, RUBS utility reimbursements up. And again, even though vacancy is also up, that's not due to market influences as opposed to the management-induced desire to modernize their units. And again, we pointed out, even while the property is undergoing double-digit vacancy, the effective growth still increased year over year, 2.2% in 18 to just shy of 1% in 2019. Again, doing more with less. Even making adjustments for overestimating the operating expenses by almost $600,000, you would still come up to a overprojection of the county on the net operating income, but still within 3.4% of what was achieved last year, which in itself was a 2.2% increase over year. We do believe that the January 1st assessment should be confirmed at $200,609,600. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Warren, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
And again, I'll jump in. Chris mentioned that the NOI is up year over year again at 2.19%. He's right. The assessment's up $23 million from last year's Board of Equalization reduction, actually a little bit more. The assessment grew by 13% on this, which is the only percentage he didn't share with you as he went down the list. And last year, the Board of Equalization made the change. And the reason for the change, which is included in the packet, so you know I'm not making this up, was that they increased the operating expenses of the property. So last year, the assessment, and it passed on a 5-1 vote, and hopefully we get Jose on our side this time, was the rationale was increasing the expenses on the apartment side to 28%. That's what, and again, a 5-1 vote. Now, 28% obviously is higher than we've seen the last 2 years, but that's what the market's indicating a building is. It's going to cost more to operate a building. He wants to stabilize the vacancy all the way down. Well, as more people come in, the expenses are only going to rise. But the income is up 2% and the assessment's up 13%. And that is causing us a lot of heartburn on this case. There's no justification for it. And that's the one thing that Chris accidentally left out of his explanation of why are we up so high. Again, we're at 10 million, 9.7, 10.5, and now 10.7, and they want to use 10.9 and said, hey, the cap rate here is a standard done finished building. When you saw, as Mark asked the question and it was answered, this building was only half done as of the valuation date. So you have to look at a half finished building, and maybe that's where you can throw a couple of basis points on the cap rate and say, is somebody going to buy a building mid construction like this, or are they going to pay the same as they would if it was done? Because the county's valuing the property as if the construction was completely finished, and it's not. And I say construction, and it's modernization. That's not some huge, crazy walls move, tear it down, turn 1 bedrooms to 2 bedrooms kind of thing. So I'm surprised I haven't got beeped on yet. So I'll stop.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Okay, it's just among board members. Mr. Matzkin.
I wanted to stay on the operating expenses topic. I too thought that in the test that the operating expenses were too low based on not only the last 4 years, including 2019, but also because it's a bit higher, but also no, let me stop there. But I'm sorry, now I lost my train of thought. Come back to me. I just drew a blank.
I'll come back to you. Other comments? Mr. Hoffman.
I mean, it does seem like a big jump year over year. I mean, that's the obvious to me. We review this case every year, and last year we were at 177, and now it's 200. And I was trying to dig into whether or not there was a huge, completed project, and all of a sudden now it's reopened and the performance is just dynamite, but it doesn't sound like that's the case. It sounds like they're just kind of rolling, refreshing rooms as they go. So I don't know how to get back to fairness here, but it just seems like a big jump year over year without something that caused that.
Mr. Lawson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Chris is using the term management-induced vacancy, but it's a proper action on the part of the landowner. In this instance, I'm actually good with what the applicant's proposing.
Yeah, I would support that too, just being that it's still a big increase over 2019.
Mr. Matzkin.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to the point I missed and then go to just what Barnes and Greg brought up. I thought I noticed in the appellant's 2020 projection that the operating expenses, the proposed operating expenses, were even less than the department's test in F1. So I said, well, if the appellant thinks they're too high, then I'm going to think, are too high based on what their projection is, then I'm going to just let it go. On the increase, I was horrified to see that the department's assessment of value was 13% higher than last year. And then I thought, well, of course, it's an improving building. The exterior was improved a couple of years ago. Curb appeal really massively changed. And now, of course, the interior is changing as well. And so then I went to the test and saw that it was about 10.5, 10.6% higher from 2019, which is at the high range of any comparable building increase that we've seen, but it's not quite as egregious as way out of the box 13%. So the test value doesn't shock me as much. I'm sympathetic that it's even higher than generally what we see. And if a stronger case could be made for the appellant's estimated value, then I would support that. But if I got to get something really definitive, otherwise I support the test.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mr. Matzkin. I mean, my problem with this is, when I look at the numbers that are being reported, I mean, the test is certainly better than the original assessment, but I do still have the angst that Mr. Hoffman was talking about. It just seems like this building is going up at a really large amount. And I can't tie it to anything. I mean, is it reasonable to assume, that in the test that it's going to, generate $200,000 more than the previous year based on the last 2 years? I would say yes, but I'm really struggling.
All right. And this is to Ken more, but the 10% increase and it's half renovated. That's a lot. And is it going to go up the same increment with the next one?
Right.
That's a lot.
Right, and again, I'm not disagreeing with you. I think what the county looked at is if you look in column C in 2018, then and they were doing renovations, and then in 2019, it went up approximately 200,000. It's about the same 200,000 that it's assuming it's going to go up. So I follow the logic. I just don't follow the assessment increase.
The net result. Yeah.
I mean, the numbers support it, but I am struggling with that. Mr. Penaranda.
Well, I have a proposal that hopefully will keep everybody happy, and also Mr. Chitlick, that he's hoping that I get online with their side. But looking at really the expenses from previous years, if we didn't have this year, we would be looking at a higher rate, which is what the county did. So, I do like, computing averages, but I think for this year, what the county used originally at 27% on the apartments is more appropriate. So the only change I did make is I increased the expenses on the revised assessment for the apartments at 27% instead of what the county has. And that brings the expenses on that side at $3,662,979. Doing all the numbers, the apartment side would be, capping at 545. Value would be $181,717,615. If we add the retail value to that, I'm coming up with $193,700,000 even. And I think that brings it up in line with pretty much with, what the appellant is requesting, maybe a little bit higher. But, I think that's really one way to go in this case. I don't know what everybody else would think, but that would be my way to resolve it. I think it is a little bit of a offside, I guess, if we were looking at a soccer game. But I think in this case, based on the past amount of expenses, I would feel comfortable increasing to 27%.
Yeah, I did something a little differently. I took the actual operating income and subtracted out from 2019 the test column F2, and then just took the difference there, and I end up capping out at 193,699.9, which is essentially your number. Yeah. So it's coming at it from two different sides and two different numbers. I mean,
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Hoffman, you had something?
I was going to say I like Jose's rationale. I think yours is good too, but it's essentially the same number. So
yeah,
I'm fine.
Right.
Okay. Anyone else? No? Okay, Mr. Panorama, do you want to make a motion then?
Yes, I'll move that we reduce the assessment to 193,700,000 even by increasing the expense ratio to 27% on the apartment side of the revised assessment.
Okay, I will second that. Motion and a second by myself. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Ken is opposed? Okay, 6-1 with no Mr. Matskin. Okay, the assessment is reduced to 193,700,000 even, based on increasing the expenses. Okay. Interesting, the two different tests came up with, it's pretty similar, almost dollar for dollar amounts. Okay, last case, RPC 2201159, 5551 Columbia Pike. Mr. Warren, if you'll tell us about the property.
And Mary, really quick before we get on that, the PPT value I don't think was removed out of either your value or Jose's of 601,921, which would be appropriate since furnished apartments.
It was taken out of mine.
It was, okay.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Mr. Warren.
Okay, so this is the Barton Place Apartments. It is one RPC. It's currently assessed at $6,837,300, $213,666 a unit. The county is recommending no change. However, in their test column, they're showing a reduced or revised value of $6,593,200. The value we're requesting today, and if you see in our summary of facts, it was initially $5,192,100. However, after discussing this property with Chris and some of the questions that he had regarding the income that was submitted in 2019, we did revise that, and that is indicative of column G in the page 3 of the apartment I&E summary. There was some inaccurate reporting that we have since amended and submitted, and so that has amended our requested value to $5,749,200 for this property. This is a property that was originally built in 1984, 32 total units. It's located right off of Columbia Pike in the Columbia Heights submarket, and it is a garden-style apartment. The assessment for this particular property, similar to the last property we were just discussing, it increased 3%. However, from the prior year, from 18 to 19, the actual NOI decreased 7%, and that's actually after the adjusted and amended I&E was submitted. So, again, based off of what was actually reported, the income is decreased on this particular property most recently, and the value is still increasing up 3%. The county did a good job of estimating in their potential income of the property and effective gross income. However, this is a property where really the main issue remaining comes down to the operating expenses. Historically, and this is over the last 4 years, you can see in 2016, this property reported 29.48, 27.43 in 2017, 26.04 in 2018, and then most recently 33.57% operating expenses in 2019. The county's guide for operating expenses now is a range based on the per unit basis. However, if you were looking at the guide from last year, they would have applied a 34% expense ratio to this property for its effective age and property type. You can see in the test column, the county did adjust their operating expenses applied initially from 28% to 31%. But again, that's still the biggest difference between the appellant's pro forma and requested value of $5,749,200 and what the county's revised test column is at 31%. They did bump their operating expenses up slightly to coincide with what was actually reported, but it's still an overestimate on operating expenses, and that's what we're hoping the county will consider in the 2020 revised assessment.
Yeah, if we're going to use an average of, sorry, Blake, of operating expenses, then we should do the same for gross potential income. He's using gross potential income higher than the property's ever achieved, an EGI that's directly on top of column E, coincidentally, even though he's using a higher market expense rate of 3%. So he's right on top of the 2019 EGI, but then taking what appears to be an average or a 3-year average on operating expenses. And sorry, Blake, you can continue. I thought you were done.
So the last thing I was going to include was on page 41 of 145. We have included a sales comps grid, and these are properties that transacted from late 17 through the first of 1/1/20, the valuation date, and that you can see the average and median sales of these Class B and Class C properties in Arlington. The average sales price of $195,000 a unit, median being $182,000 or $183,000 a unit. And again, the subject property is currently assessed at roughly $214,000 a unit.
And Greg, do you have anything you want to add? Greg Rains, do you have anything you want to add on this for Sophie?
No, just a building at that age, and I mean, it's just it's a bear to maintain. So I mean, I think that we have to. The trend is the trend on this one.
Yeah, operating costs are up, and as it's been pointed out in prior cases, nobody's keeping operating expenses lower in the DITMAR because they have so many efficiencies that other companies wouldn't have. That the true market operating expense for a property like this would be dramatically higher than 33%. And really, the old guidelines were it'd probably be in the 40s, and the old guidelines would support that. Yet they got rid of the old guideline percentage and said, here's a range. So in a way, not in a way, in fact, the owner is being penalized for reporting extremely efficient operating expenses. So saying that, yes, you told us it's 33.5%, we're going to use your EGI within $1,000. However, those expenses are pretty high. We think you can shave $15,000 off those expenses, but keep the EGI exactly the same. And the other way, it would go up dramatically higher if you took away some of those efficiencies.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chikas?
Yes, ma'am. And looking at the property, we noted that the apartment revenue was up 1.4% in 2019. As Mr. Chetwick noted, looking at a 3-year average, we saw an average of $584,000. We noted parking revenue was up 9%, other revenue up 14%, and RUBS or utility reimbursement up 534%. Gross potential income is up 1.7%, 3-year average of $595,000. Very well occupied, stabilized building. True vacancies is 3-year average of 1.4%. These metrics led to a increase in the effective gross income of 1.6% in 2019. 3-year average again of $587,000. As noted by Mr. Chitlick and Mr. Rains and Mr. Warren, operating expenses did tick up, but I believe Mr. Rains used the word the trend is the trend. Trend was actually down 16, 17, and 18. Total operating expenses 165,000 down to 161, down to 151. So it was quite a bit of a jump, even with the misallocations of some of the errors that were made. We saw a 31% increase in total operating expenditures. Obviously, if one were to look at a smooth out 3-year average, it would come much closer to what was achieved in the years 16 through 18 at an average, 3-year average of 170,000. When we look at the most recent years, 17, 18, and 19. That increase of 31% led to a downturn in net operating income as reported in 2019. That dropped to 8.7%. But again, if we were to look at a 3-year average, they'd be much more in line with what was going on in 17, 18 at an average of 416,000. I'm not sure, I believe Mr. Warren misspoke in the sense that column F of our summary sheet is actually the revision. It's not a test column. In this case, the board, we would recommend to the board that you go with column F. in that we did increase our operating expenditure projections based on what we found with 2019's information. But we still believe that the projections made for gross potential income are very modest, again, considering a 3.7% increase in 17, 1.7% increase in 2019. Given the building's stabilized occupancy, that the projection of 1.8% for gross potential income is very modest and in line with the last 3 or 4 years. Again, given that we use a stabilized 3% guideline for vacancy, the building's at approximately 1.4%. That obviously calls for an increase in effective gross, but very modest, 0.2%, 0.2% increase. And again, looking at a 3-year average for operating expenses of $170,000, we're quite a bit above that at 31% of effective gross. So in regards to the metrics that we've talked about, that led to again, a modest increase in projection for net operating income of 4%, much in line with what went on at the property in 2016, 17, and 18. And in fact, again, a good bit below the 3-year average of $416,000. So modest projections across the board in our column F led the county to come up with a value of $6,593,200. We request that the board confirm that amount. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? Mr. Lawson.
Thank you. For the county, the footnote says agent makes $10,000 deduction for reserve or replacement, whereas the county's cap rate assumes you mean 2%, not 0.2%?
It's a 0.2. You might not be able to see it on the.
Oh, it is 0.2%.
It's 0.2%.
Okay, Mr. Yates.
It's 20 basis points, not a 0.2% increase of the cap rate.
Okay, Mr. Yates, question.
To the appellant, the expenses seem to be, most of them fairly general or steady in movement, with 2 exceptions moving into 19, the janitorial and the sub-services. Is this something that, can you explain that? And is it something that you expect to continue? I mean, what's the big impact in these 2 that bumped your expenses so much?
The janitorial, that's really also kind of a subcategory. You try to maintain those entrances in the common areas with as Barnes has noted, we have a lot of manpower in Arlington, so we can usually run folks over there and clean the common areas and pick up the trash with one of our other properties, personnel labor pools, and we just could not keep doing that. So we actually had to hire a company to help us maintain the high glass area, to clean the areas, the common areas and the entries, and pick up the garage and take the trash. So that increased for that reason. And what was the other? The subcat? We actually had HVAC issues in about 30% of the units with the in 2019. So we were doing a lot of work with HVAC systems, and so that's why that category is up.
You expect these categories to continue to be higher?
Yeah, the janitorial 100% will stay where it's at. And the reason I say it's a bear to maintain, we had a lot of HVAC issues last year. We had 2 or 3 bathrooms where we actually had to take the tubs out because the subfloor was an issue. And that, once you get into that age of a building and actually having to maintain more than just reglossing a tub or reglossing a countertop, you actually have to start moving things because of just the age. It's just that those kind of things are more and more. The roof has been an issue. It's just an old building. And like I said, we have buildings across the street that probably hurt this build. It helped it from an efficiency standpoint, but hurt it from an expense standpoint. We don't try to drive our expenses up in order to save some tax dollars, we really try to maintain our properties as efficiently as possible. So we'll pull from a property when we can. It's just labor market and everything, we just weren't able to take from Wildwood Park or Wildwood Towers or Columbia Park down the street and bring over that labor. So, we've had to hire that out. It's just, and when I said it should be in the 40s, we talked about a lot of our owner colleagues, and garden style units of this ilk, you're talking 40s and some 50s up the street. So, 34 is awesome. 38 would be awesome. So I think that's why I was saying, I understand what Mr. Chica said, the trend that past we ran lower, but that's honestly because we were taking manpower probably from somewhere else we shouldn't have. So I'm comfortable where we're at with that'll be the case.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions from board members? No? Okay, Mr. Chicas, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yes, ma'am. Again, sort of following along with Mr. Yates's questions, we'd recognize the increase in operating expenditures, the 31% increase in 2019. But I think the board members do have to look at how the property's been operating historically. Again, 3-year average prior to this past year of 160,000, or some 27.7% of effective gross. When we looked at the most recent year, we did adjust in column F to reflect that increase of 31%. We're well above the 3-year average for 17, 18, and 19. We're very much on par with the effective gross that's been achieved at the property. Again, a very stabilized building at 1.4%. We're using 3%, and it should be noted that the appellant's also using 3%. So they're using actuals for income on the gross side, guidelines for the vacancy concessions, and then actuals for operating expenditures. But that led to a net operating income that's lower by $20,000 than anything that's been achieved in the last 4 years. Again, our revised value has a operating income that's indicative of the last 3 years and well below the last 3 years net operating income average. So that being said, we believe that the revision should be confirmed at $6,593,200. Thank you.
Okay, and for the appellant, I'm not sure who's going to speak, but you have a minute to wrap up, please.
They're using trend on the GPI to justify using a GPI number or even effective gross number higher than the property has achieved in the last 4 years, but then saying that they won't use that same metric for the operating expense, even though the owner is here testifying that operating expenses are higher and should be dramatically higher than even what they're reporting, or with the NOI. So we're going to look at trends. Look at the trend: 426, 430, and then now 392. He's using 408, where he's basically using trend, average, and average, which doesn't work. If we want to use average, we can, but again, we're missing the mark, I think, greatly for this. The janitorial expense in 2018 was $982. It's up to $10,000. That's not some crazy fluctuation. Percentage-wise, it's up 1,000%, but it's up 1,000% from basically nothing. And Blake or Greg, you want anything in the last 20 seconds? It doesn't sound like I want to use all my time, because as soon as we're done, I'm back to being a first grade teacher. So I have nothing else. So that's it. Thanks.
All right, thank you. It's just among the board members. Go ahead, Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. The only thing I noticed that I thought might need adjustment was the reserve. And, this is a small project, and it looks like with the 0.2%, it's about $120, which doesn't make any sense. So all I did is I took the 10,000 and took the county revision, deducted that, and I ended up at $6,431,900. So I'm just curious if others think that's a legitimate exercise.
All right, I'll jump in here. I don't like that method. I think that that's opening a can of worms from a standpoint of, looking at how we respond to reserves. I would say, though, on this property, I think in the test column, I agree with the appellant. I think when I look at the revision and the GPI, I mean, there's no way when you look at historically what the property has performed at for 16, 17, 18, and even in its highest year of 19, you know, to end up, I think there's the problem right there. I mean, that additional $10,000 that's on there. I mean, because when you look at the bottom, when you get down to the bottom and it trickles down to the NOI, I mean, the county certainly made an adjustment, but I don't think made enough of an adjustment, you know, to end up at the 408. I think that that's still too high. What I did just to kind of do my own test, I went back to, and I know Jose doesn't like picking from one column to another, so I'm not going to pick, but when I go to the original assessment, I think that's certainly more in line with the EGI of what the property could perform at over several years. And then I increased the expenses to 33%. I capped it out and I'm at $6,362,500. So curious what other people, Mr. Matzkin.
I followed all of that and appreciated it line by line, but then I look at the NOIs that have been achieved vis-a-vis the projection for 2020, and all of a sudden the county's not out of line.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow I don't know what the word is, inflated line items don't cause an inflated NOI. So maybe I need to take another minute and figure out why that is. I'm sure they didn't make an addition error, but the NOI is by no means out of line. So
I don't know. I think it is. I mean, it's based on what it actually did in 2019.
I'm talking about course column F.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, you're looking at 18, you know the expenses are a little lower than they should have been.
Right.
So that explains why 18 is a little off on the NOI. And I think it's the same thing on some of the income. It caught up to them this year.
Right, and I think the appellant, you know, gave a reasonable answer for not being able to, you know, they have efficiencies because let's face it, they have a lot of units when you look at across the county, but they weren't able to pull some of those folks. And I would certainly think moving forward, that's going to be even more of a trend of, you know, janitorial and having to keep areas cleaner and whatnot. So, you know, I tend to, you know, lean towards the appellant on this one.
Are you suggesting just accept column G, or
no?
Just
I'm suggesting
that
what I did
$10,000
and
figure.
cap out at $6,362,500.
I'm sorry, Mary, can you run through that again, how you came to that?
Yep, I followed the original assessment down to the EGI, and then I used 33% of expenses, which was 194,294, and that caps out at the 6.2%, not the 6.5, but the 6.2 at 6,362,500. You know, and you know, I think that they have created an argument for why their expenses have increased. I didn't go quite as high as to what the operating year was. They were 198. I'm at 194. So I leaned a little bit on the air of caution there, but you know, I think that that's more reasonable. It's a slight increase over last year, but I think it's more reasonable for what the property is actually doing.
Yeah, I could live with that.
Mr. Penaranda?
Increase from last year.
Yeah, I think that even, you know, looking at the NOIs, where they are, and I think just looking at that number, I think it's okay. But I think we have to recognize a little bit more on the expense side. So I wasn't really looking at the original assessment. I'm looking more like, you know, like, as I said before, whenever there's a revision, I like to look at those numbers better because I think they're more in line of what they actually get reported. I did not go to 33%. I went to 32% on the expenses on that column. And that brings to 189,580. The NOI would be 402,857. Capping at 6.2, I come up with 6,497,694. I know it's not as far as.
And normally I would agree with you there. I just think that under the revised assessment, I look at the GPI of what they're using, And the appellant makes a very valid point here. It's, higher than anything the property has done in the last 4 years. So I think that was revised too high.
But it's based on the rents they're getting.
It may be. I still think it's too high.
It's 1.77% over last year. We see that a lot, given that it's a very stabilized building. That's not a big increase percentage-wise.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. So where do people lie? Because I don't want a repeat of last week where people vote the wrong way, and I think we're all in agreement it needs to go down.
I'm with your number. I did something very similar. I was trying to hit the expenses, and I was within $7,000 of what you came up with. So I'm with you.
Of who? I'm sorry, I didn't hear. Who?
Greg
No.
Hoffman. Yeah.
No. Who? With mine or Jose's?
Mary.
Okay.
I'm good.
All right. So where are the rest of the folks?
I'm good with you, Mary.
All right. Mr. Metzgen?
I could go to either two of your revisions, Mary's or Jose's. I'm just feeling a little uncomfortable how stable this building is that we have. I guess, therefore, let me revise that. I'll go with Jose's because Mary's decrease from 2019 would be larger of the two.
Okay.
And I don't see, and maybe it deserves a decrease because operating expenses have permanently gone up. But I'm uncomfortable with the depth percentage-wise of Mary's proposed decrease. So I'm favoring Jose's.
Okay, Mr. Yates, where are you?
Well, I'm okay with yours.
Okay. And Ms. Hogan?
I'm with you.
Okay, all right, well, I believe, okay, Mr. Lawson?
Yeah, I just wanted to share with Ken again, I think we have a little bit of a Ditmar as a victim of their own efficiency. And as this building has aged and the size of it and so forth, they've just gone to kind of where everyone else is. So that's why I'm going with Mary in this case. Just wanted to share that.
Okay. All right, any further conversation? No, then I will go ahead and move to reduce the assessment to $6,362,500 based on the original assessment and increase in expenses to 33%.
I'll second.
Okay, motion and a second by Ms. Hogan. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Ken, what are you?
What did Jose vote? He raised up
voted
his
no.
hand during oppose
I'm
and said
asking, what
aye.
did you vote?
I voted no.
Well, my problem is if this fails, then it's going up to the original assessment, which I think is wrong.
It's not going to fail.
5-2.
It's
Well, I only saw four ayes. I'm opposed.
Okay, so it's 5-2. The assessment's decreased to $6,362,500. Okay, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, do any of the board members have any additional business?
No, do we get recognized for the largest number of cases heard on a single day?
Well, you don't want to be recognized too much because we don't certainly want to schedule 9 of these. Because it's a lot of information to absorb.
Yeah.
And I think the 6 is good for the time being. But nicely done, everyone. Okay, anything from the county?
Mary, I had a question about one of the values. I just want to make sure I had it right. So on the value that was reduced to the 193, is that 193,700,000 or 193,700?
193,700,000.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. All right, well, with no further business, then we will adjourn. The latest we've adjourned at 11:50 a.m. and re-adjourn tomorrow morning, September 9th at 9 a.m.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.